Morning, everyone. My name is Tony Alford with Aikens IT, and I specialize in private public cloud infrastructure. Today's webinar is called Don't Lose All Your Data, the Business Continuity Crisis, and will be broken down into two parts. First, we'll be covering backup, and part two at 10:30 we'll cover disaster recovery. Part one, backup. Malicious actors on the internet are currently taking advantage of the financial and wellness insecurity that came with COVID-19. We're seeing a 148% increase in ransomware, malware, and data exfiltration attacks during COVID, making these types of attacks more common than ever before. And it's costing businesses nearly $4 million on average to recover from an attack. Data loss of any kind costs US businesses about $8,000 per minute, and recovering from large-scale data loss is costing $15.6 million on the high end of the average financial loss. However, ransomware and malware are not the only threats to your data. There are threats which you cannot protect yourself against without backup and disaster recovery. Human error, for example, is the #1 cause of service interruption, with server, storage, and power failure following it. So what can you do to protect your environment from data loss? Implementing a backup solution, which will process and store copies of your data so you can restore it after a data loss event, is one of the best ways to protect yourself against data loss. Private cloud backups are processed and stored on your data center's infrastructure. Because the restore points are local to your environment, when you want to restore data from on-prem, it's going to be much faster than trying to restore data from a public cloud. But restoration from a private cloud backup to a cloud provider will take longer. Private cloud backups also require a large amount of free storage and a powerful internal networking environment to perform consistently and efficiently. With public cloud backups, the backups for on-prem VMs are processed on-prem and offloaded into a cloud provider storage account. Or if you're backing up a cloud VM, then it is processed and stored in the cloud provider's storage. Public cloud backups require little to no on-site storage infrastructure. You can configure them to have geo-redundant protection against ransomware and are largely unaffected by a loss of backup infrastructure. However, there are additional costs associated with storing and processing your data in the cloud, and restoration outside of the cloud provider's workload will take longer than private cloud. RPOs and RTOs are some measurables used to qualify the quality of your backup and disaster recovery solutions. Your RPO or recovery point objective is the age of the most recent recovery point. For example, if your most recent recovery point was at midnight and it's noon the next day, your RPO is 12 hours. For recovery time objective, or RTO, it's the amount of time between your service disruption and your workload being restored and running. So if you have a power outage in the data center at noon and you're back up at 2 p.m., your RTO is 2 hours. Rule of 3-2-1, it's a minimum requirement recommendation for your business continuity plan. It consists of storing at least 3 copies of your data, 2 forms of backup media, and 1 backup copy off-site. So an example would be I'm backing up a VM every day for 3 days, creating a backup copy of the backup data, and then storing either those backups or the copies in the cloud. This is going to ensure that that protected VM is resilient against common scenarios that would render the backup solution useless, such as a loss of data center storage equipment that the backup data is stored on, or a backup chain being corrupted with no copy to use as a substitute. Today we're going to be discussing Microsoft Azure Backup and Veeam Backup. Azure Backup is a public cloud backup provider. You can configure your backups to occur as often as daily and can also configure weekly, monthly, and yearly restore points. You can use it to back up your on-prem or Azure VMs. The Data Protection Manager is a utility used by Microsoft to process and offload on-prem data backups. It stores a short-term recovery point in your data center, and any restore points that fall outside of the retention range you set will be offloaded into a recovery services vault in Azure. It can also restore a SQL VM to an IaaS database, reducing the amount of overhead needed when restoring SQL. Can be configured to store restore points in another part of the country also, so that your data can be restored even if all of your IT infrastructure was destroyed tomorrow. I'm now going to demonstrate the process of creating a recovery services vault, configuring the backup policy, and adding protection to an Azure VM. So this is the recovery services vault dashboard in Azure. I'm going to select add from the blade above, set my desired resource group, my vault name, my region. I'm going to leave the region as US West 2 and click next. And I'm going to set a tag on here so that in the future, if I have a large amount of recovery services vaults, I can scale this out so that I know what each one is without having to do a deep investigation on it. So I'm going to click create and look at the deployment in the upper right hand. When this resource is deployed, I'll go in there and let's modify the backup policy. I'm going to be modifying the default policy. I'm going to configure it to take a daily snapshot at 1 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. And I'll configure 3 days of instant recovery snapshots. For the backup policy retention range, I'm going to set 30 days for the daily backups. For my monthly restore points, we can do 12 months. That way we have a restore point for every month in the past year. And then we'll also configure 3 years of yearly backups. So we have a restore point for January 1st for the past 3 years. Save that. Now, under associate items, you'll notice there's no actual VM attached to this. So this isn't backing anything up right now. But when we add the protection to our VM later on, all of this is already configured and ready to go. So I'm going to go to the resource group, and on the top blade, or I'm going to select my recovery services vault, and on the top blade, click plus backup. I'm targeting the Azure VM, ensuring that the information from my retention policy is correct, and selecting the VM I want to protect. It's deploying now, and once it's deployed, we go here in the dashboard of our recovery services vault, and then I'll refresh whenever the deployment's done. And now we can see that that item is protected and it's pending its initial backup. Next, we'll discuss Veeam backup. Veeam is one of the industry leaders in backup solutions. Partnered with Island, Veeam stores restore points in either private cloud, a low-cost Island Cloud Connect object, or a public cloud provider's object storage. Unlike Azure Backup, Veeam is able to store and restore VMs to any cloud provider. So it's cloud agnostic. You can restore to Azure, AWS, or any other provider that you prefer. It can also back up your O365 mailboxes, SharePoint sites, Teams data, etc., which, contrary to popular belief, Microsoft is not doing for you already. Its user interface is simple to understand and presents all information related to your backups in clear metrics. It also has a highly customizable backup chain process in which you can configure how many restore points the backup chain will run before starting a new one, as well as scheduling and automation configurations that allow you to determine when your backups run and attach scripts to the process. Veeam also has the ability to cluster multiple storage extents into one scale-out repository, which will load balance the data between those different extents. So this is great if you have some legacy storage that's too slow for your production environment, but it's a large amount of storage. Veeam could be a great target for this. So Veeam works at the hypervisor level, so it will request a snapshot from the hypervisor, process and dedupe that data against the full backup within Veeam, and then remove the snapshot from your hypervisor when the information is processed. Backups are processed in chains with a full backup, which would be the largest size backup in the chain, starting it, and every backup following will be an incremental until the next full backup. These incremental backups are only going to process and store change data from the source, the active full backup. I'll now walk you through Veeam's interface. and create a protection group or create protection on one of the VMs. So right here is the dashboard for Veeam. From here, you can see a list of all of your backup and backup copy jobs, their last result, their last run, their status. You can sort and filter. If you click into these, you can get detailed information on every single run that job is done. Under backup, I'm able to see the specific backup jobs, and under backup copy, I can see the copy jobs for those backup jobs. Under disk, if I drill down into one of those, I'm able to see the amount of restore points I have for each VM that's being protected. And then we can see the same on the copy jobs. Now, in this last 24 hours pane, we can see our running, succeeded, succeeded with warning, and failed jobs, and click into any of them to get additional information into which step of the process that Veeam had trouble. And you see right there, those action items are all every single step of the process. Under backup infrastructure, we can view our individual extents. Right here, you see the Azure Blob Storage on the top, and then all of the local disks that are added in. And we've actually set this up so that they're in scale-out repositories. So whenever the data starts to fill up on one extent, it's going to load balance and do the next step in that chain or the next chain on another extent. You can see that there, for more or less, the Veeam has load balanced the data across all of these different extents. All right, next we'll show you how to make a backup job. So let's do a virtual machine backup. And this is the kind of like overview network topology view where you can see your hosts, clusters, and VMs in that type of display. You can also do it through tagging. Tagging is really cool because when you use tags to add VMs to a job, if a VM exists in multiple jobs and you want to remove it from protection and you're utilizing tags, instead of going into each individual backup job and backup copy job and removing it, you modify and remove it out of the tag, and it's going to update itself automatically to all of the associated items. So here's where you'll select your storage extents, your backup proxy. You can also set the amount of restore points you'd like to retain. You can configure a secondary destination to offload like tape or your cloud provider. And then you can also do some advanced backup processing configurations here. So under backup is where you get the specific down to the details configuration. There's also settings for maintenance, storage, email alerting for succeeded or failed jobs under notifications, vSphere configurations and integration. And then right here is where you would attach any type of script. You can have these that run before or after the job. So next, this is the guest OS processing area. I'm just going to leave these default. And right here is where we can configure our scheduling. So for this VM, for this protection group, I'm going to make a 1 a.m. backup that runs on certain days out of the week. Any of the days I uncheck, this backup job won't run. You can also customize how Veeam reacts to a failed job. If you don't want Veeam to wait 10 minutes in between each retry, you can reduce that time. And you can also protect your production workloads by not allowing the Veeam run when your network utilization is at its highest, as Veeam does use a large amount of internal networking. And then from there, you would apply, finish, and verify your backup. So to conclude, cyber attacks, as stated before, are at an all-time peak during COVID-19, 148% increase. Ask yourself how backup plays a role in your business's continuity plan. Do you have backup? Is it configured correctly? Are you following the rule of 3-2-1? If it's been a while since you've assessed your business continuity plan, this could be a call to action for you to take a step back and make sure all your information is still relevant. We offer a managed backup as a service in these bundles that will customize to your business. Please reach out if you'd like to discuss any of these bundles to harden your business continuity plan. Hi again, everyone. If you're just now joining us, my name is Tony Alford with Aikens IT. I specialize in private public cloud infrastructure. Today's webinar is Don't Lose All Your Data, the Business Continuity Crisis, and it's been broken down into two parts. Earlier at 10, we talked about backup, and now we're going to cover disaster recovery. So as stated in part one, malicious actors on the internet are currently taking advantage of the financial and wellness insecurity that came with COVID-19. We're seeing a 148% increase in ransomware, malware, and data exfiltration attacks during COVID, making these attacks more common than ever before. Unprotected victims of ransomware have two options. They pay the ransom and hope the malicious actor unlocks their resources, or throw out all the affected equipment and rebuild the environment from the ground up. With downtime alone costing $500,000 per hour on average, disaster recovery is a no-brainer investment for protecting your workloads and data from ransomware or other service interruptions. So what is disaster recovery and how can it help you? Site recovery or disaster recovery is a method and solution used to keep your workloads running after you've experienced a disaster event that causes your infrastructure to be unavailable. Disaster recovery boasts significantly faster RPOs and RTOs than backup restoration, which are RPO recovery point objectives, your most recent restore point, and recovery time objectives, the amount of time needed to be up and running after a service disruption. With private cloud disaster recovery and public cloud disaster recovery, your failover or disaster recovery agent is going to maintain an offline mirror of your protected services. The difference being that your private cloud disaster recovery is going to be a site that you manage the infrastructure for, but is separate from your main production site. With public cloud disaster recovery, that failover site, that offline mirror exists in the cloud. Today, we're going to be talking about Azure Site Recovery, Zerto Continuous Replication, and Veeam Replication. Azure Site Recovery is great for replicating Azure VMs across regions or replicating VMs from on-prem to Azure. Has an RPO of over 30 seconds and an RTO of under 2 hours. It's an affordable pay per VM and per data stored price model, and its ease of integration implementation for Azure and Hyper-V VMs make bringing ASR or Azure Site Recovery into an existing Microsoft environment that much more simpler. It also integrates with Azure Automation, and you can configure PowerShell, Bash, or any other type of script to run contingent with the failover. The configuration, failover, and failback process does require quite a bit of overhead and admin work, and you're only going to be able to either fail over to another site that you manage or a site in Azure. Zerto Continuous Replication, on the other hand, will replicate site to site, one-way or two-way, whether it's on-prem or in the cloud. It also features multi-site replication, in which you can have a bunch of sites that are all replicating in multiple directions. So you could have a headquarters production environment, a data center across the street that you manage that's another offline site, an AWS site, and an Azure site, all ready to fail over to make sure you have the most resilience and availability. It's cloud agnostic, so you're going to be able to use any provider of your choice. And the one-click failover is one of the coolest features in Zerto, and I'll show you that right now after giving you a little tour of the dashboard. So this is the Zerto dashboard. This is what you'll see when you sign into your console. You can see on the top a high-level overview of what you're protecting, the total amount of virtual protection groups, VMs, data stored, compression, and RPO, which we can see is 6 seconds, which is consistent with what we see with other clients. This is pretty consistently under 10 seconds. You can see your IOPS, throughput, and WAN traffic. If you identify, let's say, IOPS that are higher than your environment can support, that gives you an idea that you need to start upgrading your environment to maintain your failover resilience. And then a site topology showing which direction the virtual protection groups are actually going to fail over to. Sites will show you your individual sites in which you can configure the directions. Under VPGs or virtual protection groups, you can get a list of each VPG, whether it's meeting its service level agreement and its RPO. Under VMs, you can get detailed information, or I'm sorry, when you click into VPGs, you can get detailed information On the journal history, so this one's showing 24 hours, that means we can restore to any second of the day in the past 24 hours. And then under VMs, you get the same, except it's the VM level instead of the protection group level. Here's where you can see your alerts and events. Sort them by timestamp, sort them by event ID. Gives you a really nice, easy to see detailed view on what's going on with your environment. Under reports, we can configure my favorite one, the VPG performance report, in which we can select all of our VPGs and view their average performance, and kind of use this as a assessment for what your network speeds need to be to continue to have a resilient environment. Now I'll show you the test failover. Right here, we're going to select the VPG that we want to test our failover capabilities for. Click next, make sure that the execute parameters are as desired, and then verify the failover site directions and start the test. It's going to run for a while, and then at the end of which we can generate a report. Next up is Veeam Replication. Good for site-to-site environments where downtime has lower financial impact. So this one is a snapshot-based failover technology, whereas Zerto uses a journal that logs the differences between the offline site and the HQ site. So this will can take a snapshot as often as every 15 minutes, giving you an RPO of 15 minutes or greater, and a really aggressive RTO for snapshot-based failover of under 30 minutes. It's the most affordable DRAS solution. Centralized backup and replication management is really cool. If you're using Veeam Backup and Replication, you can view the status, the configuration, the reports, the success jobs, fail jobs, everything from the same console with the same login. And this, again, can replicate to private or public cloud, and that replication can be cloud agnostic. You can replicate to Azure, AWS, whatever you prefer. This slide here is a graphic from Island highlighting some of the key features from Zerto and Veeam and what Island Secure DRAS offers between the two of them. Zerto pointed out that as low as 5 seconds for granular recovery replication, and we do consistently see between 5 and 8 seconds RPOs. No impact replication, as snapshot technology is not utilized. That's that journal I was talking about, logging the differences. And extensive RPO history, you can configure it to store to the second failover restore points for up to 30 days. And then on the Veeam side, that user interface that any admin can hop in and click around and figure out what's going on. You can go in with basic computer operator experience, configure your storage extents, configure your backup jobs and your copy jobs without any help, because the user interface is just that simple and makes that much sense. And as mentioned before, they have those aggressive RTOs. Since the VMs are already registered in the cloud, you just power them on whenever you need to fail over. And Island is going to offer with either solution a full VM visibility and control, role-based access to your backups and replication, self-service failover and testing, and full and partial failovers. Summary, just take the time again to analyze your business continuity plan. If you're not using a disaster recovery solution, take the time to consider whether private or public cloud failover is going to work for you, and consider doing multi-site, and do the math on how much downtime your business can afford. If it's been a few years since you've assessed your business continuity plan, you might be surprised at how outdated the information is. And consider managed DRAS for ease of management and peace of mind. Here are some of the managed DRAS bundles that we offer. And again, reach out to us to see which one of these we can customize to your environment and make you more resilient to ransomware, data loss, and service interruption.